Good evening. And thank you for being here tonight. And thank you, Immanuel, for hosting this event. Thank you, Pastor Tom, for inviting me to speak. And I also thank God, for it's by God's grace that I'm able to stand here tonight to share my family story with you. On April 30th, 1975, Saigon, the capital city of South Vietnam, fell to the communist forces of North Vietnam. This took place 2 years after the United States signed a peace treaty with Hanoi and withdrew its combat troops. The Vietnam War was a long and bloody war that spanned 2 decades. It resulted in over 3 million deaths. Approximately 58,000 were American soldiers, and more than 1.5 million were innocent Vietnamese civilians. Millions were widowed, orphaned, and maimed. The war demolished the country's infrastructure, and the economy collapsed. It resulted in a mass exodus of Vietnamese refugees. Many fled to neighboring countries by land, while others fled by boat. My family was part of the latter group. My parents grew up in a city called Bac Lieu, which is situated on the Mekong Delta of southern Vietnam. The Mekong Delta was known for its rich, fertile land and abundant resources. My family owned a large, thriving rice business that is worth millions by today's dollars. My father and his older brother managed the rice business. My uncle was responsible for the sales and meeting with clients, while my father were responsible for the hundreds of employees in the rice milling operations. My father used to tell stories of how at the peak of the business, there was so much money that they had a hard time keeping track of it. Prior to the fall of Saigon, my family lived a very privileged life. We lived in a 2-story house, owned multiple vehicles. My siblings attended private schools, and we had hired help, housekeeper, nannies, and drivers. We lived a comfortable lifestyle that came as a result of having a successful business. But in a blink of an eye, the world that my family lived in would collapse, and everything would be stripped away. Once Saigon fell, government officials began to visit my family's rice mill to take inventories of their assets. After visiting the rice mill, they would then make their way over to the family's house, making note of all my family's possessions. These visits became more routine and more invasive. Potted plants were being dug up, and floor tiles were being pried up in search of hidden wealth. It soon became clear why the government was taking inventory of all our assets. Their intention was to seize everything. Within a few months, the government informed my family that our house would permanently borrowed for government use. My family had no alternative but to walk away and leave behind everything they had worked for. The communist regime confiscated everything. My family, they confiscated the business, the house, motorcycles and cars, and even household appliances. And to ensure that the wealthy are no longer wealthy, the government had changed the currency and effectively making our paper money worthless. After being evicted from our home, my family was forced to live on a small farm that my grandmother used to grow fruit trees for her leisure. We were considered fortunate because many were charged with crimes against the government and were sent to labor camp or to clear out jungles. On the farm, there was no running water or electricity. Water for drinking had to come from captured rainwater, while water for bathing and cleaning had to be carried up from the river. There was no outhouse for the family. Evening light came from burning oil lamps, and fire for cooking came from burning coconut husks and branches. My parents with their 8 young children lived on the farm for several years, and each day, back-breaking labor was necessary to ensure a family of 10 had enough food to eat. My parents would come to realize that this would be their war for the rest of their lives. The hardest realization, though, was that their children would be held captive in this world. That was when they knew they had to leave Vietnam. To stay would mean for the entire family to die in squalor. Opportunity came for us when my uncle began to make plans for a way to leave Vietnam. My parents, grandparents, aunt, uncle, cousins sold jewelry and whatever possession they had, and along with others, gathered enough money to charter a boat to escape. The plan was to sail out into the South China Sea and make it to a refugee camp in one of the surrounding Southeast Asian countries. The risks of perishing at sea, and there are also threats of being attacked, robbed, or raped by vicious pirates. My parents knew of these risks, but they decided that it was better than staying in a country that had no future for the 8 children. After planning for a year, my family left Vietnam on June 12, 1979. We left in secret, with family being divided into 3 groups, with my mom, dad, and aunt taking a few children each and leaving on different days to the meetup point in Cà Mau, the southernmost point of Vietnam. We left on a boat of roughly 290 people. Our boat sailed into the South China Sea, and as feared, only after a few days, we were attacked by Thai pirates. A dozen or so pirates boarded, waving knives, screwdrivers, and makeshift weapons. These men seemed to be unprofessional pirates, local fishermen taking advantage of the refugees' plight to commit robberies at sea. Even so, the men on the boat didn't dare to make a move against the pirates. They had to consider their wives, their children, and their loved ones. Everyone was frightened. My mother shielded my 3 sisters while the pirates assaulted the people on board, demanding possessions, stripping jewelries, and ripping them right off of the people's ears and stuffing it in their shirts. Once they were done pillaging, they left. Miraculously, we had survived the attack. We continued to sail and eventually landed on a beach in Malaysia. We were hopeful that we had finally found refuge. But instead, we were faced with more cruelty and hostility. With tens of thousands of Vietnamese refugees flooding Malaysia, we were no longer wanted nor welcomed. The Malaysian soldiers fired their guns into the air and ordered everyone to disembark from the boat. My father, uncle, and some of the other men were ordered to kneel in a line on the beach. The soldiers shouted and beat the men with the butt of the rifle, while the women were begging for them to stop. One soldier fired his rifle within inches of my father's head, causing temporary deafness and ringing in his ear for days. At that moment, my father didn't know whether he was dead or alive. Then we were all rounded up and ordered to march along the beach over the hot sand for days with the sun beating down on us. Through exhaustion, my mother suffered a miscarriage and was bleeding. That evening, the sky poured down heavy rain. My father and my older brother held a plastic tarp over her for shelter all through the night while she sat very still. When morning came, my father found my mother barely responsive and laying in blood. He carried her lifeless bodies and rushed to the soldiers begging for help. They pointed him to a cargo pickup truck where she was loaded on it and transported to the hospital. Meanwhile, we continued to camp along the beach. By now, we have been separated from our mother for 9 days without knowing anything about her condition. That morning, we were informed that we would be taken to a refugee camp on a nearby island, only a short distance away. While everyone else was happy, my father was concerned and was asking the whereabouts of our mother. But the soldiers didn't seem to care. We were told to leave everything behind, and then was loaded onto trucks. And they took us to a site to board some old fishing boats. We waited in the boats for nearly 2 hours, but nothing happened. Somehow, something didn't go as planned, and they took us back to camp. The next morning, in the distance, we saw our mother walking towards us. She was all right. We were overjoyed and relieved to have our mother back. Within an hour of her arrival, the trucks returned, and the guards ordered us to load up again. If she were dropped off an hour later, we would have lost our mother. We were boarded into 4 small rickety fishing boats. Our family and my mom's side of the family were in one boat crammed together with others totaling 93 people. The remaining people, including my dad's side of the family, were divided into the other 3 boats. A Malaysian ship then towed our little boat at high speed out to sea. With the waves beating against our boat, it was taken on water and felt like it was breaking apart. We cried out to them to slow down, but our words were not heeded. They continued to tow us at high speed for almost 20 hours, and then they stopped. They cut the ropes and left us quietly drifting in the vast, unforgiving sea. They told us we were on our own. When morning came, the other 3 fishing boats had drifted a far distance away, and soon we saw them no more. We were without food, without water, without a working motor. People panic, but there's nothing anyone can do. It was like we were left on a floating coffin, facing a slow and degrading, painful death. The cramped space, hot, foul air, and swaying boat caused seasickness. Vomit and human waste were passed from the center of the boat to the edge of the boat to be tossed overboard. Little children were agitated and crying out of thirst and hunger. My baby twin brothers, 18 months old, were crying incessantly, biting my mom, and at times banging their head against the boat deck, pleading for something to drink. My mother could do nothing but hold them close to her, for she had nothing to offer them. Drifting for 5 or 6 more days, no longer having the energy to cry, my little brothers softly muttered the words, "Mom, Mom," over and over. My parents experienced perhaps the greatest pain that any parent could go through, and that's the inability to provide for their children. My mother recounted that at that moment, if she could have, she would have happily given up her own blood to quench their thirst and to satisfy their hunger. We continued to drift aimlessly. In desperation, people were praying to any god that would listen. My father was not a religious man, but seeing the suffering of his family slowly dying of thirst and hunger, he knelt down to pray. He prayed a simple, honest prayer. "I know there is a creator God," he called out. I know you created us and don't want us to die like this, so you are listening. Please send rain. Moments later, it rained. With excitement, the people caught rainwater with whatever they had. They used tarps, shirts, their hands, and some just lifted up their heads with open mouths to catch the life-giving rain. However, the rain continued pouring down nonstop. The boat began to take on water, and we were all afraid that the boat might capsize. My father prayed again, Creator God, I know that you heard me because you sent rain. If you hear me again, please make it stop. And then just as the rain started abruptly, it stopped. It was his first encounter with God. A couple of days later, we were rescued by World Vision. The mission called Operation Sea Sweep was to scour the sea in an area south of Vietnam to find and provide humanitarian aid for stranded refugees. For 3 days, they have been searching the area, and not a single refugee boat was sighted. But on the 4th day, like a needle in a haystack, they found our little boat. If they were a few miles off in any direction, they would have missed us. When we were picked up, we had been drifting for 8 days. They took us on to their ship, gave us food and water and medical care. Against all odds, we have been rescued. I want to show you a video clip from a BBC documentary that captured the event.
Southeast Asia, where 1 million people are in flight. Some 300,000 boat people have drowned in the seas around Vietnam, and yet still they leave. In the middle of the crisis, an American Christian charity called World Vision has decided to take action and bought a freighter to help the refugees at sea.
And the Chung had 2,200 people on it.
President Stanley Mooniham prepares to sail.
Well, this is Operation Sea Sweep, designed to try to save the lives of some of the people who are escaping from Vietnam across the South China. So primarily we want to give aid and assistance to those little boats out on the high seas, keep the people alive, the boats afloat, until they can get to land somewhere. I wish we could pick them up. I really feel terrible about leaving them there, but what advantage is it if we pick up one boatload of refugees and then find ourselves out of commission? That is, we can't land anywhere, we can't go into port to refuel or resupply, and so we're out of commission, and maybe other people die whom we might have helped if we could have stayed operative. I don't think it's a futile gesture at all. I'm not playing games. I'm too old to play games, and this is too serious a business to play games with. I will grant you that we're not doing everything for everybody, but I gave up a long time ago believing that as one person or one organization we could do that. I simply accept the fact that we do something for somebody, and I believe that is our responsibility.
With 65,000 Vietnamese leaving a month, surrounding nations like Singapore and Malaysia have closed their doors, terrified that the delicate racial and political balance of a tense area would be upset. Registration for the Sea Sweep had been difficult, as the maritime world was unwilling to accept rescued refugees.
We've tried to get this ship registered in about 6 or 8 different countries. Finally, the government of Honduras, through their local agent here, agreed to register the ship. It's been pitching and rolling a lot.
Oh, can't believe that.
They're packed in there like sardines. Just literally chock-a-block. Oh, man. There must be about 3 pieces of canvas or tarpaulin or something rigged. I rather think they rigged it in order to catch the wind. Because they have no engine, they're dead in the water. I used to have a speedboat that's as big as that. And I thought when I put a family of 6 in it, you know, I had it full, it was crowded. Here's this. That can be more than 35 or 40 feet at the very outside. But just think, we could have been 10 miles off in any direction, and we could have missed that little thing. How long have they been drifting?
10 days. 10 days.
They've been drifting 10 days?
Yes, sir. Well, do you want me to say the decision, or
Bert,
do
you are the master when it comes to this, and you know, I'm not. I know what decision you're going to make. You're going to make the same one I'd make.
Okay.
But I'm going to let you make it because you'll have to make all the others.
All right, take them aboard.
"93 people were to be taken on board, including 7 old people, 27 children, and 3 pregnant women. All were weak and dehydrated from lack of food and water. Some were blind. But the decision presented problems. There was still no port which would accept refugees rescued at sea, and the worried crew, even as they helped the refugees on board, became increasingly nervous.
Pull on her arms, not his. That's it. Man deserves a medal.
Bravo!
Don't pull it up yet. Don't pull it. Drop it. Drop. Go.
This vessel has been declared by a chief engineer in his professional opinion as being unsaleable. It could not make it to land. It cannot be repaired. It could not make it to land. Under any international law of the sea, the captain and all of us have a right to pick up these people and have them landed at the nearest port.
This is the story they told me. They left Cà the southernmost part of South Vietnam, on the 12th of June. And their boat was a big one, and their number was about some 280 or 90. Their large boat has been hit many times by the Thai pirates. The Thai pirates took their properties, and they reached a beach in Malaysia, but they weren't admitted into any camp. But after some days, the Malaysian soldiers came, and the remainder of their properties have been taken the second time by the Malaysians. They gave the refugees some receipts, and they still have them now. And roughly about some 10 days ago, the Malaysian soldiers came to see them, and they told them that they would be put out to sea on small boats. Their 4 boats were towed by one big Navy Malaysian ship, and out of high sea, the Malaysian cut the chains. At that time, they found that the engine of all their boats didn't work. And they tried to fix it, but they found that it was impossible. And so they drifted on the sea for about 8 days before they saw our ship.
Our engine is continuously in trouble. Somebody said, let's separate, let's separate. That is thoughtless, because alone it is very, very dangerous. If 4 boats are together, if one survives, we all survive, because there's someone to rescue us. I cry my eyes out. I am very frightened. We pray continuously. We pray our ancestors. We pray Buddha. We pray Jesus. We pray to anyone who listens to be saved.
As you saw on the video, my family was taken aboard C-Suite by World Vision crew. That's my mom on the left, holding my twin baby brothers. I'm the little boy on the front left, next to my oldest sister, Jenny, and is surrounded by my other siblings. I was 6 years old at the time. Earlier in the day, we were hungry, thirsty, desperate, and drifting aimlessly at sea. But now we are resting comfortably. Somehow my entire family survived. Here you can see the joyful expressions on our faces. We are together. Our stomachs are filled. And we are safe. World Vision also helped us to find a refugee center in Singapore, where we stayed for 3 months. And from there, we were resettled in the United States after a small Lutheran church from Fort Smith, Arkansas, sponsored our family. This photo here was taken on our first night in Fort Smith. If you look, you can see that we had very little. There was no furniture. We didn't have any friends. We didn't have any family. We had no money. We didn't know anything about this new country that we were living in. The most important thing, though, was that our family was together and we were safe. My father, who was recently an owner of a thriving business with hundreds of employees, now found himself in a new country with no transferable skills. He had no knowledge of the English language, nor skill to work with his hands. The burden of providing for his family weighed heavily on him. However, the generous and kind people from the church helped our family with housing, food, and clothing. They also helped my father to find a job and to rent an apartment on his own. Perhaps the greatest part about being settled in Fort Smith was the Vietnamese ministry of the local Baptist church we attended. It was where my family found community and friendship with other people who shared similar immigrant stories. But more than that, it was where we were able to discover a meaning and purpose for our lives. My parents learned about the love, forgiveness, and grace of God from the Bible and have witnessed God's love and mercy towards our family at sea. They've also seen the compassion and generosity of the Christians that helped them. God's great love for my parents changed their hearts, and soon they became Christians. They made sure all the children attended church each Sunday and are involved in church activities. All of their children eventually came to faith in Jesus Christ. Our faith in God also gave us hope and perseverance through the toughest of times. You can imagine beyond the financial challenges of raising 11 kids on a single blue-collar job with an annual salary of $20,000. There were also social and cultural challenges of being a poor Vietnamese refugee in the Deep South. But through it all, we believed God was in control. It was faith in God and hope for a brighter future for his kids that sustained my father all those years. That was what kept him going at a back-breaking menial labor job for 3 decades. After many years of setting aside every dollar they can, my parents managed to save enough money to buy a house. This picture is of my family standing in front of our first house, a cozy 3-bedroom house that snugly fit my entire family. Over the years, my parents would have 3 more children, all boys. The older 2 are twins, giving our family 2 sets of twins. So we are 13 people. My parents, my 3 sisters, and 8 of us boys crammed in a small 3-bedroom house. To make room, we had to convert the carport into the boys' room. In this room, there were 2 sets of bunk beds and a full-size bed, 8 boys and 5 beds. The rule was first come, first serve. The last one in shares a bed or sleep on the living room couch. We Chung boys shared everything: beds, bicycles, toys, and even clothes. We had 1 bicycle, and we all took turns riding it. Playing baseball was hard to do, as you can imagine. One person would have the glove, and the others would do without it. It's probably why we took interest in playing football and basketball instead. When it comes to clothes, if you find something that fits, you wear it. My father worked in a factory that made air conditioning units. The irony of this factory that made air conditioning units was that the temperature was over 100 degrees on any given day. And in the summer, it would be unbearably hot. My father would talk about how, when he'd go to work, he'd walk through the plant and peer into the offices of the office workers. These were the guys who wore a jacket and a tie to work. They sit comfortably at their desk in a room that was clearly air-conditioned. As he stood there, drenched in his own sweat, he looked in and realized that having a job like that, where he could sit in an air-conditioned room, was beyond his reach within his lifetime. But he hoped and dreamed and prayed that if he would work hard enough, that over time, one of his children would be able to have a job in an office that was air-conditioned. So he stuck with his job. He never missed a day of work. He took every overtime opportunity available. And today, I'm proud to say that all 11 of his children worked in an office that is air-conditioned. While my father worked at the factory, my mother would find other ways to help out. She would babysit, take on sewing jobs, cater for events, and bake goods to sell at the local Asian supermarket. My mother did all that she could to help provide for her family. At one point, our family opened Chung Chinese restaurant, where my mother and older brother were the chefs, and my other siblings and I were kitchen helpers, servers, and delivery boys. My parents later decided to close down the restaurant once they saw that their children had the aptitude for a higher education. So where's my family today? This is a photo taken several years ago at my youngest brother's wedding. My siblings and I lived all across the U.S. and worked in various professions in health, education, and information technology. There are 26 grandchildren in our family now, and 1 more on the way. My mother still lives in Fort Smith, Arkansas, where she enjoys being part of her church family in the Vietnamese community. She's also traveling more frequently, now visiting all of her children and grandchildren. Early last year, we laid our father to rest. Though it was a very difficult time for my family, we were able to celebrate the life of an extraordinarily accomplished man. If he were here today, the smile you would see on his face would be a testament of the abundant blessings that he had received. And the look of an amazingly proud father. He's surely missed by everyone in my family. My parents instilled in their children the values of hard work, perseverance, courage, and a constant hope for the future. We were able to freely pursue our dreams, having grown up in the U.S., where education is a right and opportunity is in abundance. My parents' circumstances were different in a war-torn Vietnam, where education was only for the few and opportunities were stripped from them. No matter how hard they worked, the fruit of their labor was taken away. Staying in Vietnam meant that my parents and my entire family would be held captive in a war that had no future for any of us. My parents had the courage to break us out of that world. My father had always dreamt of becoming a doctor, but extenuating circumstances robbed him of his true potential. So what he and my mother did was that they decided that they themselves would make personal sacrifices so that their own children could have a future. The photo on the left is of my younger brother, Vin, at his graduation from Harvard Medical School. My brother felt it was only fitting to allow our father to wear the cap and gown and to hold the diploma that he had made possible. And the photo on the right is of my youngest brother, Isaac, at his graduation from University of Pennsylvania Dental School. He wanted my mother to wear his cap and gown and hold a diploma, for her sacrifices made it possible. This is a sentiment shared by all of my siblings for our parents. Both of my parents are highly intelligent, able people, but they never had the chance to formally learn English. They never had the chance to take an ESL class. They never had the opportunity to hold a job that would value what is in their mind and what would come out of their mouth. Even today, my mother still speaks with broken English. But it was through my parents' sacrifices that all 11 children are able to hold college degrees today, including 5 master's degrees and 6 doctorates from major universities like Harvard, Yale, Stanford, University of Pennsylvania, Georgetown, George Mason universities, and other universities. We all hold various occupations: 2 medical doctors, 1 dentist, 1 orthodontist, 2 optometrists, 2 medical technicians, a teacher, a cosmetologist, and a computer engineer. As I reflected on what God has done for my family, from where we were left for dead in the middle of South China Sea, to where we are today with a blessed life in the U.S., I will never forget the story of where we came from. My family was at a point where we were without a home, without a country that would even accept us. We had nothing but a scary and uncertain future. In our desperation, we cried out to God for help, and He listened. I'm grateful to God who sent Stan Mooneyham and the crew on C-Suite. God placed a burden on Stan's heart to do something about the refugee crisis in Southeast Asia. I'm grateful for the crew on C-Suite who followed their conscience and decided to rescue my family. I owe so much for the faithfulness and generosity of countless people with whom I have never even met. I would not be here today if it were not for a small Lutheran church in Fort Smith, Arkansas, who decided to sponsor a large Vietnamese refugee family. They and many others cared for us and helped us to integrate into the American society. I'm deeply grateful and amazed at God's providence through it all. He protected us against pirates, kept our family intact, provided rain, sent a ship, and brought us into a land of opportunity. God is a great and mighty God who is sovereign over all. It was not by chance that my family had been plucked out from the South China Sea and placed here in America. God has indeed shown my family mercy. And so, what is His expectation of us? In the Gospel of Luke, there's a story about 10 lepers who were healed by Jesus. When the one leper turned back and gave thanks, Jesus asked, "Were not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? My father often compared our family to the single leper out of the 10 who were healed that returned to give thanks to Jesus. I'm challenged every day to live life with a heart of gratitude, with a heart of gratitude towards God, and with a responsibility to give back for what God has given me. We are so fortunate to live in a free and wealthy country where opportunity is limitless. I hope my family story will challenge you to also live life with gratitude and be a blessing to others.